I think I speak for almost everyone that for the love of God, please let us revisit past events in Genshin. Now, if you know my channel, then you would know why I think it's incredibly upsetting that we don't have access to past events in the game. And if you're new here, hi, hello, I enjoy Genshin story and characters a lot, and I'm gonna rant about why I think not being able to replay past flagship events that have significant impact on the story and characters are a massive problem, especially because some of these events do so much more for the characters than their own story quests sometimes. And I want to revisit some of them because why the hell not? I'm not gonna be recapping most of them because there's been a lot of these events over the past few years, but I will try to point out the ones that I feel are incredibly important towards either the lore or the playable characters. Disclaimer, as usual, my recap will be pretty unstructured and probably kinda butchered, and everything I say is my personal opinion. I will try my best to be objective though. But if you're not okay with that, that's fine. Please get out. This video is not for you. Funnily enough, one of the first events is actually one of the most lore relevant events that we have. You would think during the time where they would force you to use resin to do the damn event, it would be about something that's pretty unimportant. But no, they actually included things that are still relevant yet a mystery to this day. Obviously, I'm talking about the Unreconciled Stars event. If you missed this event, I'm so sorry. Like, this event served. It gave us the birth of Mona and Fischl's friendship that we see throughout the more recent patches. We see Fischl breaking character for the first time. You got a whole ass Harbinger introduced in this event. The main point I'm trying to get to here is that these events heavily impact player experience. See, if you missed the Unreconciled Stars event, you wouldn't know why Mona and Fischl are even friends. What's worse than that is you missed seeing their friendship budding. In that event, we got to see their first interaction, how Mona found Fischl as weird, but then throughout the quest, you could see moments where Mona started to warm up to her. This is what I would consider showing the audience that they're friends, not just telling us that they are. It's the start of an entertaining character dynamic that we see throughout future events too. Now, showing, not telling, is the foundation of any good storytelling, and good storytelling usually means just a more enjoyable quest and player experience. And you know, as a live service video game, you kind of also need to rely on people to like spending time in your game and being invested. If you're not invested or spending time on it, why would you spend money on it? This kind of storytelling also helps the players build attachment because it shows character growth. Seeing a character struggle and then grow from point A to point B is usually where the attachment begins. Another thing that happens in this very early event is actually our very first introduction to Scaramouche. And in my opinion, his introduction in this damn time-limited event is so much more interesting and memorable than the one that we got in the Inazuma Archon quest. In the Inazuma Archon quest, he just kinda shows up in the Delusion Factory and then he leaves like 5 minutes later after laughing menacingly. And then we don't get to see him again until, well, Sumeru, which is a year after. In the Unreconciled Stars event, the Traveler actually runs into him by chance, and Scaramouche actually lies to the Traveler about his identity, saying that he's just a vagrant from Inazuma. Mind you, this was so early in the game that we didn't even know what Inazuma characters look like, so people were hyped when they saw him. He was also very fake, like he was fake nice to the Traveler, which is really funny to watch considering how nasty he actually is. But I think for the first act, or at least the first time that we met him, we were led to believe that he was just a nice guy who might be playable when we get to Inazuma later on. And then his Harbinger reveal was so well done in my opinion. Why? Because it was just presented in a fun and unexpected way. It wasn't even the Traveler who realized Scaramouche was dangerous, it was Mona. They gave the spotlight to Mona to make that realization because it made the most sense. Mona has the astrology buff, so naturally she was the one who can see right through Scaramouche. And the way they did the reveal was so fun. Like, Fischl was mid-yap and Scaramouche was walking slowly towards them with a big fat smile on his face, only for Mona to teleport away with zero hesitation. We also get to see how much of an asshole Scaramouche is towards his Fatui subordinates, which is a direct contrast to how Child treats his subordinate. This actually shows a difference in Fatui character dynamics and how they interact with each other. This adds depth and a layer of complexity to a mysterious faction that we don't know much about, especially at that time. So with just Unreconciled Stars, we can already point out that these time-limited event quest adds a lot. It's something that affects the characters and therefore affects our understanding of them and also our attachment towards these characters. That's really important considering Genshin's main product is, well, the characters. So the event quests are actually accomplishing what the story quests should be doing. I don't understand why some story quests are are so bad that they're not even about the characters themselves. Some, not all, completely focus on NPCs, even when they have a somewhat interesting plot. This is bad because, well, most people play a character story quest to either learn more about them, and if it gets really good, we even get to see character depth and growth in these story quests. What's funny is that I can think of a few characters who's gotten so much depth and development through events, not just introductions, but real meaningful character moments that expands on their lore and everything. The easiest example to point out is obviously albedo. Albedo, in my opinion, is the prime example of why these events are so important and why we need them to be replayable. If you started playing Genshin after patch 2 or at any point after Inazuma, there's a pretty high chance that you probably missed out on 90% of what makes albedo interesting as a character. And that's because albedo's story quest is one of the worst ones in the game. His story quest had no irrelevant NPCs. We spent most of our time with him, but nothing really happened. We don't learn anything about him. There are no character dynamics being formed, no interactions, not even with the traveler that's meaningful. No depth added. It was just an overall empty story quest. It's forgettable. But if you were around during patch 1.2 and 2.3, then you probably experienced the winter dragonspine events. And both of those events centered around albedo. He's basically the face of dragonspine at this point. The first dragonspine event, the Chalk Prince and the Dragon, which is also his debut banner, was interesting enough for my mind to register that event as his story quest instead of his, actual story quest. Now, the event story itself wasn't anything groundbreaking, but it was okay and had pretty intriguing lore bombs. We got to actually see albedo interact with Sucrose. In fact, the event quest actually starts with Sucrose asking the traveler for help because she got suspicious of albedo hiding something from her. Turns out that secret is albedo investigating a sword, the Festering Desire, that also happens to have Durin's remains in it. Then albedo asks the traveler to use the sword in combat in hopes to uncover more of its secrets. Albedo also made a connection between the traveler's purification powers and the sword's curse not affecting the traveler. The lore is also heavily focused on Durin, which now we know is the creation of Gold, and Gold is one of the most important characters from Conria that we know of because she's one of the 5 sinners. If you missed out on this event, there's a chance that you missed out on the correlation of albedo and Durin and how Durin ended up in Dragonspine in the first place and how both are the creation of Gold. It's also important for albedo as a character and why he's so interesting too. The only reason he asked the traveler for a favor with this sword was because he acknowledged that they're both unusual individuals. He also name drops Rhine-Daughter for the first time in this event. Yes, we learn about Rhine-Daughter in other ways, but this added so much about how damaging her creations were in Mondstadt and obviously her connection to albedo. Durin was also said to be able to rival the Anemo Archon's powers, so there's that. This makes albedo one of the first characters to be tied to Chemia, the alchemy that created the monsters that flooded Tevat during the Cataclysm, and it also kinda reveals why Dainsleif is so distrusting of him. Durin is responsible for a lot of destruction in Mondstadt when the Cataclysm happened, and who's to say that albedo isn't capable of the same thing? After all, they're created by the same person using the exact same method, which is Chemia. Which is why this event felt like his story quest to me. The event tackled things that his story quest should have tackled. And the next Dragonspine event is, in my opinion, one of the best event quests even to this day. Maybe that's just the nostalgia talking, but I genuinely loved that event. Shadow Amidst Snowstorms was such a banger, and I'm so sad it's probably forgotten by now because there's no way to revisit it. But that event was a lot of fun. Most of the fun for me came from watching multiple characters interact on screen. And no, it's not just a roll call to cheese an appearance from a random character. The featured characters there actually kind of made sense to me. The group was albedo, Eula, Amber, and Bennett. 3 out of those people are part of the Knights of Favonius, and Bennett's part of the Adventurers Guild, so it made sense too. The Adventurers Guild was holding an event in Dragonspine, Amber was helping out, and Eula got dragged in because she's friends with Amber. And the Traveler was there because they were also seeking out albedo on some personal business. That business was Paimon wanting to make a juicer or something. And like the last time we stepped into Dragonspine, there's always some mystery to unfold. This time, albedo mentions how there's been a lot of his alchemy notes just randomly and suspiciously going missing, and he found some footsteps nearby. We also found Bennett stuck in a cage. Albedo goes to investigate the footsteps that lead to a cave, and he went missing for a while, and then we bumped into him again. We then run into Eula, who informs us that she was just attacked by Albedo, which doesn't really sound like Albedo to any of us. So the natural conclusion here that there must be an imposter. And Albedo reveals to the traveler something that we already know, but it's something that's also never really acknowledged or confirmed in the game directly. That being, he's a homunculus created by gold. I know it's not the hardest conclusion to come to, but that's such a big thing to confirm in an event that's time gated. We also learn Albedo was created after Kandria was destroyed, so now we have confirmation on how old he is, like approximately, and his innocence despite being tied to gold. Like, we can kinda assume in the past 500 years he hasn't really done any harm despite being a homunculus and the creation of gold. It's also fun to see because Albedo, who usually works alone and in isolation, was forced to interact with very eccentric people like Eula and Bennett. Bennett even mentions that he's worried that his bad luck is slowing down their progress in tracking down the imposter. It's a very fun group dynamic to follow. And all of the cutscenes that we got from that event is just amazing. Absolute chef's kiss for me. My favorite is obviously when the fake Albedo started attacking everyone, and that's the footage that they showed in the trailer. I distinctly remember when the trailer for 2.3 dropped, everyone was just like flabbergasted on why Albedo is attacking them. Like, what happened? Did he turn evil? Like, why is he fighting Eula? Oh, it was such a fun time. It was such a fun event. Okay, back to what I was saying. After they were attacked by a whopper flower that wanted to replace Albedo, apparently, he explains that Durin's blood can mutate life forms on dragonspine, which explains the evil whopper flower. But I think it's definitely interesting how these mutated life forms all want to replace Albedo. Like, that seems to be their main goal here. But the traveler isn't sure if that was the same imposter that they came across earlier. It's just really mystery after mystery. Albedo also addresses the star tattoo on his neck, making it proof that he's the real deal. We get a cutscene of Albedo monologuing about how he understood fake Bedo's motivations, and if he were the failed prototype, he would have done the exact same thing and had the exact same desires. And at the end of the quest, he even teases us about his birthmark and leaves the ending kinda open. We don't really get a confirmation that the Albedo at the end is the real Albedo, or if fake Bedo can just replicate the birthmark at will. It's insane to me that Albedo's entire connection to Kandria, and most importantly the Hexen Circle, are entirely tied to time-limited events. Albedo's basically stripped off of his lore in the actual game because these events are time-limited. My best friend actually picked up Genshin in 2024 around patch 4.6, and he has a completely different perception of Albedo as a character than I do. He thinks Albedo is incredibly boring and he doesn't understand why I like him so much. In my mind, Albedo is an extremely compelling character who's not only a homunculus, but he's created by the person responsible for the destruction of Kandria. Even though he's quiet and serious most of the time, he's also kind of mischievous and cheeky, and we see those sides of him in these events. The person who created him, other than destroying Kandria, is also someone who's a part of this super secret coven of witches, and he currently lives and is basically the older brother of the daughter of Alice, which is someone who's very mysterious, if not the most mysterious character in the game. His serious yet cheeky personality, being the creation of gold, and knowing Alice are traits that makes Albedo interesting as a character. And all of those things are locked behind time-limited events. Honestly, Albedo feels like an NPC in his story quest because his actual story starts after the quest, which is also probably why I remember the Chalk Prince event as his story quest, which is crazy to me. Shouldn't be like that. Now, it's impossible to talk about Genshin's flagship events without talking about its summer events. We've had several over the years, but I think it's not an unpopular opinion to say that the Golden Apple Archipelago events are probably one of the most memorable events Genshin had to offer. I don't really talk about gameplay on my channel, but the Golden Apple Archipelago events were able to serve not only great gameplay, but also great character interactions. In the first Golden Apple, we actually got to see a whole new area area that was actually fun to explore. And keep in mind, this was pre-Inazuma, so this was actually the first new area we've gotten in the game after Dragonspine. The event started with Klee receiving a pretty outlandish letter about the Dodoko King, telling her to go to the Golden Apple Archipelago, which is a place that not a lot of people know of. In fact, it was pretty mythical. So considering the circumstances, the traveler, Jean, and Barbara decided to accompany Klee in finding this mysterious place. Obviously, the only person who would know about such a place is the Sassy Bard himself, Venti, and he summoned Dvalin. Our mode of transportation to the Golden Apple is actually Dvalin, which is pretty awesome. And even then, we had some interesting lore about Barbados and how he's probably responsible for the set of islands there, and even Akodomeki from Inazuma is referenced there, which, if you didn't know, is how the Magu Kenki ended up in the Golden Apple in the first place. There was this Inazuman pirate around a few hundred years ago that stole the Magu Kenki, and then his crew got blown away when the Serai Island seal was broken and they ended up in the Golden Apple Archipelago. But most of all, we got an excuse for a lot of important Mondstadt characters to come together for the first time. Not long after we arrived, we got to see Diluc and Kea being stranded on an island and causing all sorts of smokes because they were trying to build ice bridges to get across, but Diluc's pyrovision kept messing them up, which is a very funny nod to the way a lot of players relied on Kea's ice bridges in the earlier patches. We also find out from them that Albedo and Razor were also on their way. It's later revealed that each of them got a letter that encouraged them to go there. For Klee, it was about the Dodo King. For Albedo and Razor, it was about Klee. And for Diluc, it was about the Abyss Order. Kea's was about a pirate ship and treasure. Turns out the one responsible for the cryptic letters is Klee's mother, Alice. Everyone was surprised except for Albedo, who knows her pretty well. He also calls her an extremely enigmatic and near omnipotent sorceress. And Alice also reveals that she and Klee belong to a different race, which also have a very long lifespan compared to humans. So this was the first time we ever interacted with Alice. It's also the first time we see Klee and Albedo interact outside of Albedo's trailer. It's the first time we see Jean and Barbara talk to each other. And this is also the second time we get any real interaction between Diluc and Kea, which is crazy if you think about it. Like, considering now, almost 5 years later, we know how important Alice is to the lore of Teyvat, you'd think that they would introduce her in an event like this. And again, they're not just random roll calls, but these characters are actually important to each other. Jean and Barbara are sisters with estranged parents. Albedo and Klee are also found family when Alice took Albedo in after he was separated from Gold. And Diluc and Kea also grew up together and have a very complicated relationship. So having these characters thrown in a pot to interact was definitely a treat. It was fun to see all of them interacting on screen. It's an event about family and found family. It's also packaged as this grand adventure with mystery in an island that we know nothing about, but it's also lighthearted, and that's what made it such a good event. Despite its lighthearted tone, it didn't deprive us of important character moments, enjoyable interactions, and even important lore, which is why it's a shame that we can't revisit it. Now, the second Golden Apple event was actually better than the first one. We started in Mondstadt again, and this time Fischl got a letter from Alice. And since Mona and Fischl became friends in Unreconciled Stars, Mona is also there. Plus, after realizing who sent the letter, she already knows her own master is probably involved. We go to find Venti again, and we found him with Kazuha and Xinyan. They're already in Mondstadt because of a poet society or something, and Kazuha and Xinyan are apparently also coming along. Venti passes on a device that Alice gave him, and we get to return to the Golden Apple Archipelago. Now, not gonna lie, I was skeptical at first. I wasn't too excited, at least in terms of the characters that's being featured. Not because I don't like them, but because I feel like this is a pretty random bunch to be thrown together. I mean, it is random, right? It's Xinyan, Kazuha, Mona, and Fischl. Mona and Fischl are already friends here, which is something that again made more sense if people had access to the very first event that happened almost 2 years prior. But Xinyan and Kazuha, it feels like they just wanted one character from Liyue and one from Inazuma this time. But anyway, wow, this event. Despite all of my skepticism, this event did so much for every featured character, even Xinyan and Fischl. To briefly recap, this time is a bit different because there are Fatui going around in the Golden Apple. There's a sentient talking boat, and also these mysterious mirages and new islands that started appearing. Items that have significance and are also important to the featured characters, like a bonsai tree that Kazuha recognizes, also started appearing, so the group decided to investigate further. After touching the bonsai tree, the group got teleported to a domain that resembles Kazuha's childhood home, and then Kazuha got separated from the group for a little while, and then they got reunited, and then he explains that this domain seems to have replicated his childhood in some way from his memories. It also also replicated some of the things that happened in his childhood, like certain events that happened, not just like his home. Kazuha realizes that the domain was there to help him revisit his past regrets. In his case, it revisited the time where the Kaedehara clan was suffering from the falling from grace after the incident with the Raiden Gokaden, which is something that we actually get to see in another event. We even get a scene of Kazuha's father with Kazuha, or at least their silhouette. We get to see on screen how Kazuha was told that his father failed to revitalize the clan and they were losing everything. Kazuha's father actually wanted his son to just live a free life since there was no point in pursuing the family art now that they've fallen from grace and losing everything anyway. But what's surprising to me is that Kazuha actually rejected this, initially at least. He refused. He didn't want to just abandon the Ishin art and his family. We all know him to be this free-spirited guy who goes wherever and does whatever. But not too long ago, he was also someone who struggled in letting go of something that he knew was dying. After his father died, he finally accepted the fact that his father was right and he decided to become a wanderer in Inazuma. This experience, like reliving this experience in the Golden Apple, actually awoke something in him. He came to realize that he never really wanted to let go of his family's legacy, or at least not the art of it. It reminded him of his initial reluctance and why it's so important to him. Despite everything that's happened over the past years, like deep down, Kazuha still wanted to cultivate his own bonsai tree and keep the Kaedehara clan traditions alive, and this domain helps remind him of that. This experience actually helped him reconnect with his roots and family. It's such a great moment for his character, like honestly. That is an entire character arc and growth that we get in one domain. I mean, it's not any new lore bomb, like we kind of know these things about Kazuha, but knowing and seeing it in a quest as it unfolds is just a completely different experience. And Kazuha isn't the only one that gets this treatment. The next one is Shinyan. We get an entire background reveal on how her family treated her when she was growing up and the resilience that she has. Her positive attitude didn't just come from her passion for rock and roll, it was just who she is. She even mentions that she doesn't use her music or rock and roll spirit to win arguments with people. She was always the type of person who kind of killed people with kindness, even if they weren't always the best or kind towards her. No, being completely honest, I didn't really care for Shinyan going into this event, but I did come out of it with a lot more appreciation towards her as a character. The one thing that I got from her event domain is that she has always been unapologetically herself, even when it's hard and met with disapproval from others. And that is something that I just always admire in people, like even in real life, because sometimes it's hard to be yourself, especially when you're different. Next up is, I think, the fan favorite, which is Fischl's domain. I personally really like this domain because I've always found Fischl to be an entertaining character who's playing a character. So seeing her backstory explored is something that I really enjoyed as well. We see pieces of her childhood, we see her parents playing along to her fantasies, but who on occasion also still calls her by her real name, Amy. There's this narrator in the domain who recounts the war between the princessin and a dragon. Mona deduces that this war represents Fischl's inner battle, her battle to deny reality, something that she doesn't want to face. And we also see Fischl, or Amy, being told by her parents that she should stop believing in fairy tales. At the end of the domain, the group discovers another Fischl. This other Fischl forces the OG Fischl to confront her insecurities and her faults. OG Fischl admits to them, but ultimately she takes pride in the power of her imagination. Oz then explains that fake Fischl and Amy are one and the same. Fischl then finally makes peace with this and embraces herself, quirks, flaws, confidence, and all. She closes her chapter with character growth. She recognizes that her imagination is what makes her unique and powerful, and it's not a weakness like most people would assume it to be. Now, last but not least is Mona. Now, a part of her Mirage and domain actually replicates her house back in Mondstadt, which revealed that Mona is actually not broke. Which is funny because up until this point, the way they portrayed her as a character has always been this broke astrologist struggling to make ends meet. Like, she can't seem to afford her rent and she struggles to pay for meals. But it turns out she just uses her money to buy expensive astrology equipment. Mona's story mostly explores how fate can't be altered or reversed. This is why she thinks astrology is such a disdained profession, because it reveals the truth and it can be something that's hard for people to accept. And despite everything, that is something that Mona learns to accept. She accepts that fate can't be reweaved, and she decides that rather than dwelling on her helplessness to change things, she'll just have to seize her destiny and continue to guide people through the art of astrology towards their futures. Which is just a really great portrayal of Mona. Like, we know she's awesome for being an astrologist and is connected to the Hexen Circle. In terms of portrayal, we haven't really seen much of her other than being the broke astrologist before this event, and here she actually got the chance to have some layers and depth in her character, so I like that. So it turns out these mirages are actually appearing because of one Fatui guy that we met earlier, and they're doing some kind of illegal research that the Fatui themselves don't really support, so hence why he's doing experiments on a deserted island. The device is modeled after the power of a god and is capable of altering the state of people's brains, which is probably why those mirages started to appear and basically forced the group to face either themselves or their past, which in my opinion is a good premise, to be honest. I mean, it's not anything mind-bending or a crazy plot twist, but I personally love that it was more than enough to bring out character growth for 4 different characters in one event. Events obviously don't have the luxury to be as long as an Archon quest or world quest, but when done right, it can showcase interesting and intriguing character exploration just like they've done in Summertime Odyssey. Now we have 2 other summer events, which are the Secret Summer Paradise and most recently Summertide Scales and Tails, but I don't think I will be discussing these ones in depth in this video because of time. But are they important to the lore and characters? Absolutely. The Summertide Scales and Tails especially, because it's about the Hexen Circle and the world that they created. Again, I just don't understand why they keep featuring factions as important as the Hexen Circle in a limited time event. What's worse is that, as of the making of this video, the most that we see of the Hexen Circle is actually in that Summertide Scales and Tails event. We get our biggest lore crumbs about them in an event that no one can experience again because it ended in July of 2024. This quest featured Simulanka that was created by Alice, Barbeloth, and Anders' daughter. I'm so sorry if I butchered all of that, but anyway, all of them are members of the Hexen Circle. Barbeloth is actually Mona's master, and Anders' daughter is the author of The Boar Princess. And if you're a lore geek, you're probably already familiar with The Boar Princess. There's also Mini Durin created by Anders' daughter, despite Barbeloth already warning her that Mini Durin will suffer the same fate as OG Durin. And we actually see this in the quest itself. It's part of the story of Simulanka. And then of course we had the hero of Simulanka, so that's more Wanderer development for you. So it's a pretty damn important event, okay? I think Mondstadt's signature event is the Windblume Festival, while Liyue is obviously the yearly Lantern Rite. For Windblume, I think there are 2 events so far that centered around it. The first one was way back in patch 1.4, where it was actually the first time that all of Mondstadt's characters showed up in one event in a really relaxed setting. It was pretty brief, but it was a nice event that featured a lot of important characters. The plot centered around the Windblume Festival and the history of Mondstadt. It was a pretty chill event. It ended with Venti revealing what the true meaning of Windblume is, and while it's not a massive plot twist, it's still a nice event that allowed for the exploration of Venti's views and by extension Mondstadt's views on freedom. The Windblume flower isn't actually tangible, it's actually more of a symbol for the people, and during the Caribbean's reign, it was actually a code word used by the people who were rebelling against the tyrant. It's associated with the red-haired warrior who fought alongside Barbados and who is also probably the ancestor of Mondstadt's very own Batman. I mean, by the start of the event, we can already guess that there's no real Windblume flower, but it's nice that we got to see how Venti's values as an Archon actually being implemented. I mean, we know he doesn't really manage Mondstadt directly, but I feel like through the first Windblume Festival, we got to see one of the ways he extends his idea of freedom to his people, and it's also really nice to be able to see just how different each character was, just based on their interpretation of what the Windblume flower is. Each interpretation is so unique to them, and I love to see it, honestly. What they chose as their Windblume flower actually says a lot about each of them as characters, and I like that exploration. Now, the second Windblume is actually in patch 3.5, so Windblume isn't like really yearly, it comes and goes every few years. And the second Windblume event featured important Sumeru characters, specifically Sino, Dignari, and Kale. And why is this important? Well, because Kale is here. She's in Mondstadt. If you're not familiar with the Genshin webtoon, Kale is actually one of the most important characters there, and the setting was in Mondstadt. Kale is very close and good friends with Amber. She's mentioned this at the start of the Sumeru Archon quest. She knows a lot of people in Mondstadt already. She even mentions that she's traveled to Mondstadt by herself before, but now we actually get to see it, and we get to see her interact with other Mondstadt characters as well. We have several interesting character interactions. Personally, one of my favorites is the discussion on found family. This is showcased the most through Cyno, Tignari, and Kale, and this particular scene between Albedo, Cyno, and Tignari, they discuss what it means to be a family in Sumeru and caring for people who aren't necessarily related to them by blood. And also, because most of the focus was on Sucrose and Kale, it also allowed for some character growth for both of them. Both are very introverted characters, and Kale even wishes she has a different personality at the beginning of the quest. The whole quest is about healing from one's past and obviously friendship and family. We get several important character interactions too, like Cyno and Lisa. It's a completely skippable interaction, but if you talk to them, they will reminisce about their time back in the academia because they were peers and had the same master. This is also, I think, the first time Cyno showcased his unique sense of humor in an actual quest. In the Sumeru Archon quest, he's pretty stern and was in work mode, so we didn't really get to see his nerdy and corny side. Now, obviously, the biggest lore bomb was the first reveal of the Hexen Circle. I think this event was the first time they were actually mentioned by name, and we finally know the connection between Alice, Gold, and Mona's master, and that's because they're part of the same coven and they have tea parties. They also casually mentioned that this group of mages challenged the Anemo Archon at one point. In the cutscene about the Hexen Circle, they even laid out the foundation for Anders' daughter, who is the person who created Simulanka, the one I mentioned before. She's also the author of the Boar Princess, which is where Kale found the prophecy at the beginning of the quest and kickstarted this whole thing. We also met Scarlet, who's the successor of Jay, who, if you don't know, is the first mayor of Sneshnaya. These are extremely important characters and lore bombs that are yet again event exclusive. Like, the Hexen Circle is becoming more and more relevant to this day, especially as we learn more about Gold, Conria, Alice, and all that. I will sound like a broken record, but I just don't get it. This is so important. Just make it replayable, please. Now moving on to Liyue, I think everyone can agree that the Lantern Rite is one of the most important events in Genshin, and it's the only event that they run yearly, like consistently. Now, other than its cultural significance, Lantern Rite also plays an important part in highlighting and developing a lot of characters. The first Lantern Rite was focused on Xiao. It was about how he was reluctant to join because he doesn't really like being around humans. Not because he's edgy, but because he genuinely believes that his bad karma will harm any human within his proximity. But he does end up going, and a lot of the Lantern Rite is about honoring and mourning the Adepti from the past. Now, considering how weak Xiao's story quest actually is, similar to Albedo, I think the first Lantern Rite event did him and his character a lot more justice, especially on the part where he begins to warm up and shows growth in his relationship with the people of Liyue and the Traveler. The second Lantern Rite, which is in patch 2.4, centers around Keqing, and we also got Shenhe's interlude quest released around the same time. There's a lot of themes being explored here too, like the blend of traditional arts such as Chinese opera and rituals, and also like more modern traditions and human-centric cooperation. There's also this whole thing about how to not be so preoccupied by work and being so busy and forgetting to celebrate and just letting life pass us by accidentally. This is mostly explored through Keqing and her workaholic tendencies, and also probably because they wanted to sell her new skin, because why else would they have picked Keqing as the central character when there are 3 other characters that's actually featured on the event banner? But that's just my opinion. I don't hate Keqing, I'm just saying. Now, patch 3.4's Lantern Rite is probably one of the most lore heavy, and it will forever bug me that no one will be able to replay this event ever again. This is the Lantern Rite where they actually expanded on a lot of important characters in Liyue, those characters being Madame Ping, who is an Adeptus as we know from the Archon quest, and also Guizhong. Now, Guizhong is important for a lot of reasons. She was the goddess of dust. She's the best friend of Zhongli and Madame Ping. Well, she was more like rivals to Madame Ping, but you get it, right? And she was the one who helped build Liyue. She's also the one who usually eats with Cloud Retainer and Zhongli at that table near Cloud Retainer's domain. You know, there's a reason why there's a whole area called Quili Plains. It was named after her and Zhongli because they essentially built Liyue together. She's described to be extremely brilliant and intelligent. She's the person who loved glazed lilies, but she tragically died in the Archon War. And after years and years of only hearing about her, we finally get to see her design and what she looked like in a limited event. She's an incredibly important character that you'll only know about if you dig dig through a lot of text or if you played this event. Now, don't get me wrong, this event didn't cover everything about her, but at least it acknowledged her existence in a way that's not in a wall of text. Like, it's a different way of acknowledging her as a character. She at least has a design now. That cutscene and that part of the 3.4 Lantern Rite is honestly so good. It highlights everything special about Liyue's Lantern Rite. There's lore, there's friendship and love and honoring the departed. There's an exploration of grief, mortality, and mourning of loved ones. It's a nice event. I'm a fan. And honestly, some of the most touching yet simple stories in Liyue came from Lantern Rite. It doesn't have to be a story about a long deceased goddess of dust. Like in the next Lantern Rite, for example, in the 2024 Lantern Rite, it was about Gaming. Gaming is someone who's very passionate about performance and he wants to continue to pursue his craft despite the very real setbacks that he might face in pursuing that life. His dad feels like a parent that we're all very familiar with, like especially if you grew up in an Asian household, this will be very relatable to you. Now, Gaming's dad isn't exactly thrilled about Gaming's choices, and it's not because he's extremely controlling or because he wants his son to be unhappy, but he's doing what he thinks is best for Gaming. We know Gaming's dad doesn't mean harm and it comes from a place of love for his son, but it comes out as distrusting to Gaming. But his dad's disapproval didn't stop him from pursuing his passion, even if it means having to live with a strained relationship for a while or maybe forever if his dad never changed his mind. It takes a lot of courage to do that, and it's a simple story that I think a lot of people could relate to. Gaming stood for what he loved and he persevered despite all of the consequences that it came with, and his dad finally came around. Not because Gaming forced him to, but because at the end of the day, his dad loves him. And even if Gaming turned out differently from what he initially pictured and is making different choices, his dad eventually chose to trust that over what he thinks is best. That's actually unconditional love from a parent that's portrayed in a very healthy way. It's not perfect, it has had its bumps, but at the end of the day, it persevered. It's also huge character growth for Gaming, and of course having Xiao Yun trying to muddle like a concerned aunt just adds a lot of entertainment. I personally really like this Lantern Rite. I think it's my favorite so far. Now, if you know me, I'm a fan of Hu Tao. I even made a video about her like 2 years ago complaining about how none of her lore was ever explored in the game. I used to be kinda annoyed that Hu Tao's quest was too focused on NPCs and didn't really touch on anything important about her, like things that we didn't already know. Like sure, the quest was about how she was the one who is able to access the border, but that's pretty much it. It doesn't really say anything about her as a person. We've never seen or explored her personal relationships with her grandfather and how important her role is as the Wangsheng funeral parlor director. In events, she's mostly the quirky, whimsical, and kind of morbid girl. It's mostly played off for laughs or entertainment. Like we were forced to see her rap before we got the chance to see any real character moments from her. But that all changed in the most recent Lantern Rite. We got to see Hu Tao's grandfather and even her father, which is surprising because we never really heard of her parents before this. And it turns out because her father actually failed in his duties, that's why Hu Tao probably never really talks about him. And his mistake is actually what caused his own death, and it's also what caused her grandfather's early demise despite being relatively healthy. We just got to see so many sides of her as a character, which includes her resilience, vulnerability, acceptance, and lighthearted moments of friendship. Like everything's there. Everything just makes her feel a lot more well-rounded as a character. She actually feels like a person. We also see how Hu Tao views her father. To her, her father is an unworthy director due to his inability to really let go of life. She very obviously internalized her father's inability to detach from life as the cause of his failure, so in order to succeed, she feels like she must remain detached at all costs. This also explains why she doesn't like Baiju. He's someone who goes above and beyond to cheat the cycle of life and death or bend the rules, and Hu Tao probably sees his attachment to life as something negative, and it's also why Chi-Chi's existence has bothered her for a long time. The game also definitely showed us how Hu Tao is selfless enough to leave everything behind for the greater good. We see her conviction and resilience. We see her in her quieter moments where she's most vulnerable. There's no shoving of an NPC, and the game also isn't just telling me how selfless Hu Tao is and how much she loves her friends and the people of Liyue. It's already there in present representation. Overall, it was a really engaging story about Hu Tao's relationship with her family and her roots, and also how she views her role as the Wangsheng funeral parlor director. Learning something so personal about a character is what makes them have depth, and this Lantern Rite did that for Hu Tao. If you really think about it, most of Hu Tao is just locked behind events. Like even her goofy and silly antics, interactions with Xiangling, Xingqiu, Chongyun, Xiao, and most importantly Zhongli are all locked behind time-limited Liyue events. Other than Hu Tao, if you missed past Liyue events, you probably missed Goba's entire lore about how he's the god of stove who sacrificed his own power in order to help save the people of Liyue. He saved the people of Liyue from starvation, and doing that made him who he is today. That's how he ended up as Guoba. And then Xiangling found him in a cave. There's even this very sweet interaction where Guoba recognizes who Zhongli is because they're old friends. Honestly, one of my favorite moments back in the day. It was just so sweet. You also probably missed this very monumental but fairly random dinner that was also the first Archon interaction we've had in the game during the 2023 Lantern Rite, where Venti attends the dinner hosted by Hu Tao, and there he had this pretty silly banter with Zhongli, which is hilarious if you know both of them. Seeing Venti and Zhongli, which are two of the oldest Archons in Teyvat, interact and pretending like they've never seen each other before is hysterical to me. It's also the first time we see Xiao interacting with Venti, which, considering his lore and how Venti's flute once saved Xiao from literal death or possibly madness, this was a pretty important character interaction that a lot of people missed. So there's no way I can touch on every single event, so I'm gonna mention a few that I feel like were staples, or if you missed them, you probably should look them up. So think of this section as a lightning round. Okay, so we'll start with the first one, which is the Moonlight Merriment. This is the Moon Chase Festival in Liyue, and this is where all of the Guoba lore bomb I mentioned happened. It's a really heartwarming event. It's where a lot of Liyue characters interacted with each other for the first time. The next one on the list is Labyrinth Warriors. Did you know in the year of 2021, there was a whole plotline about how Child was actually tasked in hunting down Scaramouche after he took off with the Gnosis. There was speculation about how they might clash one day, and obviously that didn't happen, probably because continuity issues. But yeah, we got a fun interaction between Child and Yoimiya and Xinyan too. The Irodori Festival is probably one of the most fun and intriguing story at the time. We get a glimpse of the Kaedehara clan again, this time exploring the lore of the bladesmiths of Inazuma and the Raiden Gokaden and how Scaramouche was responsible for their downfall. There's even this tease of him because at the time he was still on the run with the Gnosis. There's also Albedo there who interacted with Xingqiu. So if you're familiar, Xingqiu is an author. He's a renowned author, and Albedo is his illustrator. So there's that. Fun characters all around. Another one that I feel like was a fun one was a Parade of Providence. What can I say? I love seeing characters in competition, and this was the Interdarshan competition in Sumeru. We get representatives from each Darshan, and it's just an overall fun event featuring fun characters, including the Wanderer's start as a university student. Now, if you're looking for something heartwarming, then you would probably love the event that featured Nahida's birthday after she was caged for 500 years, and she never really got the chance to celebrate it, but now she does. We also have one where Fremine and the Traveler help out a grieving mother that just lost her son in Fontaine. These events have so much heart to them, and I think it's a shame that some of the story quests and even some of the Archon quests can't have the same impact. Now, obviously, this also impacts the characters, most of which feel like pretty empty shells that we never really get to see. They're pretty, but layers that make them interesting as characters or as people are missing. As we've discussed, Albedo is the primary victim of this. Hu Tao is also someone we barely see without events. Klee is also basically exclusive to summer events for the last few years. I also would like to add Ayato to this list because we genuinely never met this man other than in his story quest. The first time he actually felt like a conniving schemer that he was in the Irodori Festival, where it was mostly orchestrated by him. We also know that he was the one who helped out Kazuha from that event. Ito is also someone who's basically tied to events at this point, especially if they're light-hearted ones. He's pretty goofy, so if he's featured in an event, it's a guaranteed fun time. Plus, he is actually an entertaining character, so there's that. But Ito got a lot of his character growth and layers from his own story quest, so it's fine that they don't really want to add anything else to him. He's a simple yet layered character. Ayato Obito, on the other hand, his story quest had a lot of potential, but it was just executed really poorly. Now, there are a lot of 5 stars that are like this, like especially the 5 stars that's released post the conclusion of an Archon quest. Like, these 5 stars are basically reliant on an event or their own story quests, and if their story quest doesn't deliver, they're pretty much forgotten. On the opposite spectrum of this, we have characters that were given so much focus on events that they just kept getting layers and layers of development. The most obvious one is the Wanderer. We get an entire arc from when we first met him in Unreconciled Stars to his college days in a Parade of Providence, and then his journey as the hero of Simulanka. And that's not even mentioning the Archon quests that he's a part of. There's also a lot of Kazuha, who gets a lot of his backstory explored in the Summertime Odyssey and Irodori Festival. The way you experience these characters will be massively different depending on when you are actively playing the game. You started playing late into the Inazuma patch? Congratulations! Albedo is probably one of the most boring characters in the game for you. You took a break throughout Natlan and you came back during Shishnaya, but your favorite character is Hu Tao. Yeah, have fun never experiencing the exploration of her backstory and her relationship with her family. It's such a middle finger to the people who enjoy the game or are about to start enjoying the game, because we will all have a different experience of it, and not in a good way. It will forever be bizarre to me that they chose to lock so much of the material that will actually help them sell these characters. Again, Genshin's main product are its characters. Other than the design, it's important to sell the entire package of these characters. And these events provide their story, their background, their growth, and characterization. These are the things that will keep you attached to these characters. Designs might trigger the initial appeal, but there's a reason why a lot of people are attached to developed characters like Furina and the Wanderer. So, what now? Do I have a solution for this? No, I'm not Hoyoverse, but I will continue my quest in sounding like a broken record until these events are replayable. They don't even have to give out Primo Gems or rewards for these things. I'm sure a lot of people would just love to revisit these quests or experience it for the first time. And it also doesn't even have to include gameplay if that's an issue. Like, I don't know, maybe like for Golden Apple, they don't have to recreate the entire thing, just some parts of the island that is relevant to the story. Imagine really loving Xiao and never experiencing the first Lantern Rite. It was the event for him, and it came so early that if you started the game just 6 months late, you would have missed it. The argument that it disrupts continuity is also pretty stupid in my opinion. There's just a lot of different ways to go around it. Like, I don't know, make it a dream, make it a distant memory for the traveler. They could have a That's So Raven vision for all I care and it still would have worked. Because the point of this is just to give newer players the option to experience the game in its complete state, meaning they're just not getting fragments or the shell of a character that they're pulling for. It's also a chance for older players like myself to re-experience some of my favorite events. If storage is the problem, then is it possible to just make it a DLC? Like, I personally want to replay some of these events and stories, but not every event. So having it as a DLC seems to be the best option here. I know it's a lot easier said than done, but can they at least try? We're about to enter Shishnaya here, and I would love for everyone to experience this game in full. There's just so much that Genshin has had to offer over the years, and it makes me sad to think that a lot of the things that made the characters so special will just be gone, like lost to time or in Hoyo's basement. Of course, you can search them up on YouTube, but come on, it's not the same. You know it's not the same. There are so many references made in these events that will only feel rewarding and hit the right way if you've played the actual events that they're referring to. For example, in that Yume Mizuki event recently, they mentioned the test of courage that happened 2 years ago in an event. And guess what? That best friend I talked about who thinks albedo is boring as he was also confused as in this event. Because what test of courage? He's never been through any test of courage in this game. I mean, is it so significant that it makes it unplayable? No, but you know, it's just not the full experience. Meanwhile, my experience in playing that event was like, oh yeah, that was a fun event 2 years ago. Remember when we had to pick who to go through the test of courage with? I remember going with Kazuha because I like Kazuha. Kazuha, but some of my friends went with Ayaka because they like Ayaka. The Scaramouche and Mona fan arts that we see floating around, like if you've never seen them interact in Unreconciled Stars, you probably would just think that people are shipping them because they both have huge hats. I can go on forever, honestly, and if you've made it this far, I hope you had an enjoyable time listening to me rant essentially about the same thing over and over again. But here's hoping that in the near future, there will be an actual way to revisit these past events. Maybe it's wishful thinking, but hey, a girl can dream. Thank you for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!